All right, so we're back. And today we're diving into this, well, kind of crazy mix of stuff. Wildfires, Meghan Markle, and Meta. All these things that seem like, at first glance, like they had nothing to do with each other.
Right.
But we're going to see if we can, like, pull out some connections here, right? See what they tell us about, like, the media and how we all, see the world. So we got a whole stack of articles from Regal Rumination, and we're going to unpack them all. Ready to go.
Absolutely. And I think you might be surprised by what we find along the way. Some interesting stuff.
Okay, great. So wildfires.
Yeah.
First off, the situation in LA is, well, pretty dire, right? I mean, Biden called it a war zone.
Yeah, and that gives you a sense of just how bad it is.
The death toll's already at 16, and they think it'll keep going up.
Yeah.
And the damage, the property damage is just massive.
It's absolutely tragic. And it really kind of sets the stage, I think, for this whole controversy around how Meghan and Harry, respond. They've been out there, handing out food. They've opened their home in Montecito to friends who, had to evacuate.
Yeah.
And they're also donating through their Archwell Foundation.
Right. And that's where things get a little interesting, I guess, because people are really divided on, like, are they doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, or is this all just, for show?
Exactly. Some people are praising them, saying it's great they're helping, but then you have others calling them, like, disaster tourists, saying they're just using this horrible tragedy for publicity.
And this is all going on, by the way, as Meghan's getting ready to launch her new Netflix show. It's called With Love, Meghan. Actually, watch the trailer. It's all about, her cooking in her fancy Montecito kitchen, gardening, hanging out with celebs, that whole, aspirational lifestyle thing. But given the timing, with the fires raging just miles from her home, people are saying, is it really the right time to be promoting this, like, lavish lifestyle?
Yeah, it's a tough one. A lot of experts are saying going ahead with the release, as planned, would just be totally tone deaf.
Yeah.
And that it could, backfire big time.
One of the Regal Rumination articles actually quotes Phil Dampier, who's a royal biographer. And he says, the last thing anyone is interested in is a program about having friends around to eat canapes or arrange flowers when the city's going up in flames and people have lost everything. That's pretty harsh.
Yeah, no kidding. And then you have Nick Eade, who's a brand and culture expert. And he's even saying that Netflix might, be reconsidering the release date because of all this. But then again, there's the other side of the coin.
Okay. What are people saying in support of Meghan and Harry?
Well, some folks are arguing they're just, trying to help. Like, they're showing up and doing good, just like William and Kate have done in similar situations.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember Afua Hagan, she's another royal commentator. She made this point about how William and Kate always get praised for, their charity work. But Harry and Meghan, it's like they get criticized no matter what they do. Do you think it's like a double standard or something?
It's a good question. Are we being harder on them because, they stepped back from royal duties? Or is it something else?
Well, it looks like the public pressure, might have actually worked. Netflix ended up pushing the release back to March 4th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But that hasn't stopped the criticism entirely.
No, definitely not. Now, some people are saying that, like, her visit to help with the wildfire relief, that was staged, like, just for the cameras.
Yeah. Regal Rumination has some pretty brutal critiques. Angela Levin, she seems convinced that Meghan, like, dipped off the media before she went, just to make a show of it all. And she also compares Meghan to other celebrities who are, like, quietly donating or, really putting in the hours to volunteer. And she's basically saying that Meghan's efforts are all, like, superficial and self-serving. And then there's Justine Bateman, the actress. She called Meghan and Harry ambulance chasers and disaster tourists. Wow. Just wondering if they're trying to, like, position themselves for a career in politics or something.
It's interesting, though, how all these criticisms, they kind of focus on the optics of it all, like how things look, rather than the actual impact of, what they're actually doing.
It really feels like Meghan just can't win. She's either too visible or she's not doing enough.
Yeah, it really highlights how public image, it can be such a double-edged sword, especially these days where, like, every move is under a microscope.
Yeah, and then you always have the comparison to William and Kate. They seem to, like, float through these situations without any drama.
Right, and that makes you wonder, is it a deliberate strategy on their part, or is it just, like, their personality and, the way the public sees them?
Well, it's clear that the public, at least when it comes to Meghan, they're paying attention, and they're not afraid to judge. But before we go too far down that road, our deep dive, it takes kind of a sharp turn, right? into the tech world. Meta just announced they're scrapping their third-party fact-checking, and they're going to loosen content moderation.
Yeah, and this is where things get even more, complicated. Instead of those independent fact-checkers, they're moving to this system called community notes. So basically, it's going to be up to users to flag stuff that might be false.
And from what I've read, that has a lot of people worried. Like, what about misinformation spreading unchecked?
Yeah.
Especially, for vulnerable communities. Some experts are saying this could be disastrous.
Yeah, those are real concerns. And it'll be interesting to see how Meta responds to them. This whole move seems to be in line with the new Trump administration's stance on free speech, which, adds this whole political layer to everything.
It's true. And we can't forget that Meta actually donated to Trump's inauguration. And they've appointed some pretty high-profile Trump allies to, top positions in the company.
Yeah, all that context is important when we're trying to understand, what's behind this decision.
Okay, so we've got wildfires, a controversial Netflix show, and a huge shift in, how one of the biggest social media platforms in the world handles information. And guess who has something to say about all this? Harry and Meghan.
Oh, of course they do.
They issued this, really strongly worded statement criticizing Meta's decision. They're accusing them of, everything. Undermining free speech, normalizing hate speech, putting profits ahead of safety, and abandoning marginalized communities. I mean, they did not hold back.
Wow, that's pretty intense. What stood out to you the most?
Well, they make this really powerful argument that, just because a certain country has certain policies about free speech, that shouldn't dictate what happens online for everyone, everywhere. They're saying it's a global issue. They even connect this back to their own, advocacy work. They said, quote, "Having worked in this space for the last 5 years and witnessing the real-world devastation these decisions have, we feel there is no justification for why this industry behaves as if they are exempt from the ethical and moral standards everyone else abides by."
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Their experience with, organizations like the Center for Critical Internet Inquiry, Parents Together, and Screen Sanity, it's definitely shaped how they see this.
Okay, but here's the thing. Their friend, Nacho Figueres, he actually came out and supported Meta's move, called it a return of free speech.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty interesting. So even within their own circle, there's disagreement on this.
Right. It's not so simple. Black and white, free speech, no free speech.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between, protecting free expression and making sure people aren't getting hurt. And that's a tough thing. Platforms, individuals, we're all trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. And honestly, we're just getting started. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on how all this fits into, the bigger picture. But first, how about we take a quick break?
Sounds good to me. I think you'll find these connections we're going to make pretty thought-provoking. I mean, it really is kind of wild, right? Even within, Harry and Meghan's close circle, people have totally different views on this. It says a lot, I think, about how tricky this whole, free speech thing is online. Trying to have open discussions, but also make sure nobody's getting hurt.
Yeah, it feels like everybody's trying to figure out where the line is,
Yeah.
And who should be the one to draw it.
Exactly, and those lines are, always moving too, especially as technology keeps changing and new platforms pop up.
It's definitely getting more complicated.
Yeah.
And it's not just about free speech, right? It's about, how we get our information, who we trust, how we even form our opinions when there's just, so much content everywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, we're bombarded with stuff from all sides, right? It's harder and harder to figure out what's actually true, what's just biased, and what's, straight up manipulation.
And speaking of manipulation, this whole thing with Meghan and how she responded to the wildfires, it really makes you think about celebrities, right?
Are they just using these situations to, boost their image? Or are they really trying to make a difference?
Yeah, that's a question that's been around forever. But it's even more relevant now with social media, right? Celebrities, they have these huge platforms. They can influence so many people.
And it seems like how the public sees them, that's everything. If people think they're not sincere or they're being fake, it can really blow up in their faces.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where, we come back to William and Kate again. They seem to have figured out how to do this whole public service thing without pissing everyone off.
Yeah.
People see them as more authentic, less calculated.
Makes you wonder, is that a strategy? Or are they just, naturally like that? It's probably a bit of both, honestly. But it shows that, everything they do, every word they say, it's being analyzed. Especially when you're in the public eye like that.
It's almost like a performance, right? You have to be so careful about, how people see you.
I mean, to some extent, yeah. But we also got to remember that celebrities are, real people. They have their own values, beliefs, reasons for doing things. They're not just like characters in some media play.
That's true. It's easy to get caught up in all the gossip and drama, but it's important to remember there are real people behind all these headlines.
Exactly. And speaking of real people, we can't forget about the victims of the wildfires. Their lives have been completely turned upside down, and they're facing challenges, we can't even imagine.
That's a good point. Like, we got to keep that in mind as we're, analyzing all this other stuff. The wildfires, they're a reminder that climate change, it's real and it's devastating.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, right? Is all this focus on Meghan and Harry taken away from the stories of the people who are actually suffering?
That's a good question. It makes you think about, how we decide what information is important and what stories get the most attention.
It's complicated for sure, and it's always changing. But one thing's for sure, the lines between actual news, entertainment, and social media, they're getting blurrier and blurrier.
And that makes it even harder for us, right? To figure out what to believe, how to sort through all this information.
Got it. We're all just trying to make sense of these little pieces of stories and come up with our own opinions.
But how do you do that when you're constantly bombarded with, contradictory information and biased perspectives?
That's the million-dollar question. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I do think it starts with recognizing, our own biases, questioning what we think we know, and trying to look at things from different angles.
So basically, be critical thinkers, not just, passive consumers of information.
Yeah, exactly. And remember that the media, it's like a mirror of our society, with all the good, the bad, the messy stuff.
Man, it's a complicated world out there. This whole deep dive has honestly made me feel kind of overwhelmed by it all.
Yeah, I get that. But I think it's important to remember that just because things are complex, it doesn't mean we have to shut down.
You mean it could actually be a good thing?
It can. Because it forces us to engage with the world in a deeper way, to ask questions, to analyze, to think for ourselves.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed, we should see it as a chance to learn more and be more engaged.
Exactly, and that's a powerful thing.
Thinking back to Meta and their policy shift, it's like they're just handing the keys to the truth over to the users, right? Is that a good thing?
That's a question a lot of people are debating right now. Some say it's democratizing information. Others say it's going to lead to more chaos and lies.
I got to be honest, I'm a little skeptical. It seems risky, What about all the potential for bias and people just manipulating things?
Yeah, those are definitely valid points. And we'll have to see how Meta handles all that as they roll out this new system.
Feels like they're taking a big gamble with the future of online conversation.
It's a bold move for sure, and it's going to have big consequences, good and bad.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around. But before we get lost in the specifics of this debate, I want to go back to something you said earlier about how the media landscape is like a reflection of our society. What did you mean by that?
Well, just think about it. The stories that get the most attention, the voices that get heard, the biases that get reinforced, it all reflects what we value as a society, what we believe, who has power.
So it's not just about reporting the facts, it's about shaping how we understand the world.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be critical of what we see and hear in the media, to question the narratives, to look for different perspectives.
So it's about recognizing that the media is a powerful tool, and it can be used for good, but it can also be used to manipulate people.
Right, and it's up to us to decide how we want to use it, as individuals and as a society.
Wow. That's powerful. It's a reminder that we're not just sitting here watching things happen.
Yeah.
We can actually help shape the media and the stories that shape our world.
I think that's a key takeaway from all this. We have more power than we think.
We've definitely covered a lot today. Wildfires, celebrities, online discussions, the media. It's been quite a ride.
It has. And like you said, we've only scratched the surface of some really important stuff.
So where do we go from here? It feels like we've ended up with more questions than answers.
That's kind of the point of a deep dive, right? It's about sparking curiosity, challenging our assumptions, and encouraging people to keep exploring.
It's funny, right? We've been talking about wildfires, but it feels like we've been talking about wildfires in a different sense too.
Yeah, it's a good metaphor, isn't it? All this information overload we deal with every day.
Exactly. It's like we're trying to make sense of this inferno of information, right?
Figure out what's real, what matters, who to even trust. And just like a real wildfire, sometimes it's hard to see clearly through all that, smoke and flames.
It can be so overwhelming. And then you add in all the scrutiny that comes with celebrity, and social media is always changing the rules.
It's like trying to stand still and the ground's constantly moving under your feet.
That kind of brings us back to what you were saying before about who's responsible for putting out these fires of misinformation.
Yeah, that's a tough one. No easy answers there, but it's definitely something we all need to be thinking about.
So is it on platforms like Meta? Should they be stricter with their rules, and really crack down on what people post?
Or is it more on individuals? We all have a responsibility to be careful about what we share and how we, interact with others online.
And what about us? The people who are reading and watching and listening, are we doing enough to fact check, think critically, get different perspectives?
It's got to be a team effort, right? Everyone's got to play their part.
It's like we're all firefighters trying to contain these blazes of, bad information. Protect ourselves and the people around us from getting burned.
That's a powerful way to put it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some things you hope people will take away from all this?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just being aware of the power of perception, how much it influences how we see things.
Yeah, like with Meghan Markle and the wildfires, or Meta and their policies. We saw how much public opinion matters, and it's often driven by stuff that's not immediately obvious.
And we also got to be aware of our own biases, right? When we're reading the news, scrolling through social media, all of it.
It's so easy to get stuck in our own little bubbles, only seeing what we already agree with. But it's really important to challenge ourselves, seek out different points of view.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, we have to remember that we have a choice in all this.
What do you mean?
We're not just passively absorbing information, right? We can decide what we read, watch, listen to. We can choose how we participate in these online conversations.
So by being informed, thinking for ourselves, and just being good citizens, we can actually help create a more accurate and honest view of the world.
Exactly.
Well, that's definitely something to think about. This deep dive has been, intense. But I think we've all learned a lot.
Definitely. A lot to unpack there.
So to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this kind of wild ride. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into, whatever's happened in the world. Until then, stay curious.